Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this evening about our exhibition, Rising and Falling. I'm Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator here at Colorado Photographic Arts Center. And we're so excited to have all four artists here joining us this evening on Zoom to talk more about their work in the exhibit here at CPAC. If you are local and have not had a chance to visit the exhibition, it's up till November 18th. Please do stop by. The work in person is fantastic. And just a few announcements. This is a webinar, so if we will have a Q&A. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I will kind of deal with them towards the end. And our next exhibit, Tell Me a Story, has an opening reception on December 1st with the juror Mary Statzer. Next week, we have PhotoVox. If you're here, it's in person, it's a print share, and we're having a member happy hour the kind of hour before, so starting around 5 o'clock. So that's next Wednesday. And those are kind of our little bit of upcoming programming we have. But I want to kind of get us started. So tonight, I'm so happy to have Alex, Kalen, Martha, and Jennings joining us this evening from all over the place. East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country. So I'm going to let each of them kind of speak more about their work and introduce themselves. And we're really excited to talk about the work. So I'm gonna let us get started. Alex, I'm gonna have you kick it off. Let me share my screen so everyone can see images that we're talking about. So, and then just so everyone knows who's watching, there's an exhibition install shot just to give you a little context of the work in the gallery as the artists are talking. Alex, it's all you. I think you're there.
Thanks, Samantha. And thanks to you and to the Photographic Arts Center for hosting this show. It's been really cool putting it together and seeing everybody's work. It's been neat. I was able to be there for the opening, and so it was neat to see everybody's work talking to each other on the walls, which I thought was particularly excellent, and it was a really nice job curating it. So thanks. Yeah. So my name is Alex Heilner, and I've been doing landscape photography for a long, long time. And a lot of it is aerial. A lot of it is taken from the sky, from airplanes or drones. You'll see some of both in my pictures tonight. And specifically, we're talking about a project I've been working on for quite a while now called Draining the Colorado. And I kind of backed into this project because I was photographing all kinds of things around the West, development, sprawl, extraction, agriculture, water usage, and water movement, and kind of realized at a certain point that it actually really was all the exact same water, which was the water from the Colorado. And decided at a certain point to make that a more deliberate and focused center point of the work, although it's quite a large array of images that span a lot of things. I've been working on both images of the river itself and other rivers. It's not just the river, it's the entire Colorado River Basin, and also images that kind of talk to the communities of people who use the water and or who might not use the water if the water is going away, which is the crisis moment that we're in. And we'll come to more of that, I'm sure, as we go. This is a picture of the Blue River coming into the Colorado River near Kremling. I just wanted to show this one first to kind of talk about taking pictures from up in the air. I think aerial photography lends itself to photographing a big landform like a river. It's very hard to understand something as geometrically massive and sprawling as an entire river basin unless you can get up in the air. So I think that it's one aspect of that I've really sort of leaned into for doing this work, for talking about the water in the Colorado River. You can show the next picture. This is also a confluence with the Colorado. This is the Green River coming into the Colorado in Canyonlands National Park. The Green River is the one coming from the right. Colorado is coming from the bottom, and they both leave together through the top of the frame. And this image really talks about something interesting about part of the reason that I get up in planes to photograph these things is because sometimes that's the only way to see some of the things. There's really only there's three ways to see this place. One is from a plane, one is from a boat, and one is from hiking. The hiking is really hard to do. This is very far from anywhere that you can drive to. It's not undoable if you're a serious hiker, but it's not easy. And if you're rafting, it's beautiful from what I've been told. I've never been down in this canyon. But you have a very specific and somewhat limited view. So getting up above it in the plane really helps you understand the scope and scale of all of this. Also, in some parts of the West, where things are in national parks and recreation areas, it's illegal to fly a drone, which is the other way I photograph some of these things. So a plane becomes really the only way to do this kind of work. And maybe it's a good moment to give a quick shout out to Lighthawk, which is an organization that has enabled me to fly without having to pay people to fly me around, because they have partnered with pilots who have their own plane and are willing to fly people like me doing conservation-oriented work to get up in the air and see things or do things or move animals, all kinds of things. So more on that later if anybody's interested. Next picture. I'm assuming that most people, if not everybody who's here, knows pretty much a lot about what's going on the Colorado River and the fact that we're using more of the water than there is. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it's worth looking at this map really quick just for reference. Because one of the things that's really interesting about the Colorado is that most normal rivers that aren't totally detoured and everything get bigger and bigger and bigger until they reach the sea. And the Colorado does a funny thing where as it moves through the lower basin and through the Grand Canyon, from there towards the ocean, it actually gets smaller and smaller because the water starts getting taken away from it and used for agriculture, for drinking water in cities. The vast majority is for agriculture, but other things. And if you look at this map, you'll see those sort of ochre color routes at the bottom are the All-American Canal, the Central Arizona Project, Colorado River Aqueduct, and other paths that take the water away from the river and towards Phoenix, Los Angeles, San Diego. And it's also worth mentioning right now that, of course, if you're in Denver, about 50% of your water comes from the Colorado River Basin as well. Probably you're aware of that, but it's still hard to remember that when you're on the east side of the divide. And it seems so easy to have your water come out of your tap, right? Next picture. So the next couple pictures are flying over Lake Powell, which of course is a huge reservoir. It's not a natural lake at all. And as I'm sure everyone knows, it was created by the building of Glen Canyon Dam in the 1960s and spent the next 2 decades filling and has spent the last couple decades slowly draining because not enough water is coming into it to sustain the lake at the level that they had envisioned it. This particular spot I'm interested in. So when I made this photograph, it was just about a year ago, and the lake was at its lowest level that it had ever been since it was filled. And that means that this spot where this boat is anchored was in fact underwater for 40 or 50 years prior to just a few months before I made this picture, probably. And then, of course, last year, you all had a really nice snowy winter. And so a lot of this water's come back, not enough to fill the lake, but a chunk has. So this spot is now underwater again. So it's really interesting. The lake, both Lake Powell and Lake Mead, become a really visual way to understand the water use and the changes and the fluctuations in water levels, which is what I think is very enticing. Obviously, as a photographer, you can actually literally kind of see the water going up and down, rising and falling, as it were. Next picture. And this is a great example. This is a houseboat marina in Antelope Point, which is near Page, Arizona. And this is an entirely floating marina. And when I went to photograph this in spring of 21, the lake level was very low by historic standards. And I thought it was very funny and amusing and not funny to photograph this picture where you could like barely see the boats because they were dropping down below the level of the shore of the water. And of course, since then, it dropped considerably further, like another 70 feet after this. And so these boats, had I gone back to the same spot at its lowest, would have been like completely out of view. So again, just another very visceral and visual way to look at it. Next picture. Smith Fork Canyon is a small side canyon on Lake Powell. So this is just like an arm of Lake Powell. But I love this picture because you can really see the interplay between the lake level going up and down and all those markings along the walls that, are really like rings showing you the different levels it's been at, and how it fits in with the long-standing landscape that's been there forever. Not forever, but for thousands of years. Okay, next picture. Everybody is very, very familiar with Lake Mead and its bathtub ring. This is an image of that, but it's one that I particularly found really compelling, partly just because the scale is immense. I don't know if you can see, but in the very, very center there, thank you, Samantha, that little dot above the hand is a boat. It's not a small boat. It's like a big, like speedboat with people in it. And so that bathtub ring there is probably about 100 feet high vertically. And this was not at the lowest the lake has been. This, again, was about 2.5 years ago. And the lake has dropped substantially further since I took this picture. Obviously, I'm interested in the visual and kind of graphic elements of this, as well as the story it's telling. And a lot of my pictures are kind of walking between those two things. How do you tell a story that's compelling and meaningful and gets a lot of information across, but is also engaging and interesting, and in some cases beautiful to look at? Next. This is nearing Lake Mojave, further on down the river past Lake Mead. Everything below Hoover Dam and Lake Mead is very stable. The water does not change almost at all. And that's because it's extremely controlled. And it's also because California has extremely senior water rights. And I won't go all into the mechanics of that, but it's important to understanding how the river works, how it's totally managed, maintained and changed by the people who run it. And so everything going south is maintained at a very certain amount of water because it's all going to end up in Arizona, California, and the last little bits will end up in Mexico. Next. The last 3 pictures I want to show you are a little bit less about the river itself and a little bit more about how people are using the water or trying to work without it. This is Lake Havasu City. Right on that giant lake there, as you may know, is actually a dammed up portion of the Colorado River. And this is a place that in 1960 was a tiny little army camp with like 50 people at it. And now it's a city of 60,000. Again, totally, relying on this. The entire fact that this place is here is because the river has been made into a place for recreation and whatnot. Next picture. This is a brand new a couple years ago when I made the picture, housing tract just outside Lake Las Vegas, which is just outside Las Vegas. So very, very dry, entirely dependent on Lake Mead water, and actually a little bit of groundwater as well. Brand new housing at the time I took this picture. Everybody's got a pool. Nobody's got lawns. Well, maybe a little bit. So, it kind of talks to the differing ways people are thinking about their water usage. A lot of people question whether there should still be development around Las Vegas. I'll just say Las Vegas is better than other big cities at managing its water so far, but it's an open question. And finally, the last picture is Green River, Utah, which sits on the Green River. But I just love this image because I think it pretty viscerally gives you a sense. Many of you have probably traveled through Utah and Nevada and the sort of drier, more arid parts of the country that are further west from Denver. But you get a sense of what it's like out there. And I think you can understand in a very visceral way how every single thing that happens, every building that's built, every blade of grass, every faucet is dependent on water from the basin one way or another. And obviously this hotel wouldn't be there if water weren't moved around quite dramatically. And I think the last thing I'll say is just a little segue. I really liked having my pictures up next to Kalen's, a wall away. And I think while almost everything in my images talks about how people are using water or worried about using water or whatnot, the people in my pictures are either non-existent or often very, very small, like in this picture. And I thought it was really a nice counterpoint to have Kalen's pictures next door, because his pictures really have the people front and center. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. And then Kalen, with that great segue, I'll have you jump in and get started.
All right. Well, thank you, Alex. I didn't know my photos were near yours, but that's really nice to hear. Hi, everybody. My name is Kalen Goodluck. I'm a independent journalist and photographer based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The work that you see here, they're a series of panoramas that I shot on 35 millimeter for those who care about film. But I shot them for a story for High Country News. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that publication, but they have a great Indigenous Affairs desk. So this was a series that I did for them, and also co-wrote the written piece for it. It was called Indigenous Feminism Flows Through the Fight for Water Rights on the Rio Grande. So the editor had come to me, wanted a water story on the Rio Grande. And I was already writing a story for, the Water Education, another kind of publication on the Colorado River, Pueblo or tribal water rights, that big fight that was going on and is still kind of ongoing. But I decided that, it'd be great to look at Pueblo water rights here in the States, because there are 19 Pueblos here based in New Mexico. And they actually follow a different kind of water rights law regime that's a bit different than other tribes, just because of the nature of how this land was colonized. And so their rights actually kind of stem from the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, for which actually kind of set the precedence for a lawsuit called New Mexico v. Amat, which is now kind of known as the Meccan Doctrine, whereas other tribes, their rights really kind of stem from the Winters Doctrine, which is, it's kind of complicated. But what I wanted to focus on was different kinds of water fights or conflicts that Pueblos were engaging in the state, both sort of in the present, or, also very future looking, but also in the past too. So let me see what's the next slide? Okay, here we go. So this is Phoebe Sweenham. She's a hydrologist who runs her own company called High Water Mark. And she does a lot of water consulting and water rights, consulting, mostly for Cochiti Pueblo. During a lot of the past the wildfires in the state, she's been working on trying to help diverge some of the flooding that goes on after a wildfire. There's rainfall, and then all of the muck kind of can come down off of mountaintops in a landslide. And so Cochiti Pueblo is kind of right in direct impact from those kinds of disasters. So she's worked on a lot of projects like that. But when I was talking with her, I was really wanting to kind of know what the state of Pueblo water rights sort of is in the state. So a little bit of background on Pueblo water rights, or just tribal water rights in general, is that they can go on for decades. And that kind of goes, you have to solve these water rights issues through litigation or settlements. And they can go on for years and years and years. And it's particularly cumbersome for tribes because they just don't have as much resources as, say, maybe a state has, or other kind of moneyed, um, other stakeholders within those water rights. Even though that tribes and pueblos typically have the most senior water rights stakes in the region, just because they've been in those regions the longest. For the most part, it's so much harder to lay claim to those kinds of water rights. And so she has been on the forefront of helping Pueblos gain a seat at the table. So she's been not only consulting for like Pueblos like Cochiti, but also with the states and other interstate sort of agencies that help manage the flow of the river. So she's been really advocating for tribes and Cochiti. So this is just a photo of her in the Rio Grande kind of riparian area. It was just like a beautiful morning, and it was nice there's a lot of nice light out to take a portrait. Okay, next. So this is a photo of the Rio Grande. As you can see, it's very kind of a dinky river at this point. Very low. I cross this river here all the time. This is on the Alameda Bridge, if you've ever been to Albuquerque. This is I was walking on the bridge and snapped this photo, and you can see the Sandia Mountains in the background. But yeah, every time I cross this bridge, I kind of look at the water and just look at how low it is, or sometimes like it's a good day when it's like flowing, when it's like a lot deeper than usual. And then while reporting this story, I mean, this is some of the first stories I've reported on the river and on water rights, and kind of got disenchanted by the Rio Grande because I learned that it's all controlled artificially, and that there's no real natural river flow. And so that kind of bummed me out to learn that from all the Pueblo people I talked with for this story. But yeah, okay. Next, let's see. So this is getting into one of the stories of this woman I photographed named Verna Teller. At the time that I photographed her, she was a judge, Chief Justice for, let me see. Of Isleta Pueblo, which is right down south of Albuquerque. So actually, can we find a photo of Verna Teller? Let me see. Right here. Okay. So this is Verna Teller here. And she has kind of this amazing story to her. So she, back in the, let me see. I have my notes. I reported this in November 2021. So it's been a little while since I've looked over this story. But in the 1980s, she and other community members in Isleta Pueblo were noticing like this green foam that was washing ashore. And the Pueblos here are very much ceremony oriented. Like their whole calendar is for the most part like very much filled with different ceremonies, and so Isleta Pueblo, for some of their ceremonies, they needed to actually go into the river to bathe, but they were very much wary about performing their ceremonies because like the water looked really polluted and they didn't know what was in the water, essentially. And so the elders at the time had actually come to Vernateller and appointed her to figure out what was going on, like where this wastewater was coming from, and figure out like what to do about it. And so she kind of had to start from scratch and figure out like, okay, this wastewater is just coming from the city and is being dumped there. If you are traveling down South I-25 from Albuquerque and you pass into Isleta Pueblo, you'll see it right away. There's a very long road of industry there as well. And so the industry there would be dumping their waste into the Rio Grande as well. So she pretty much got together a team of legal experts, of hydrologists, environmental scientists, to kind of sue the city of Albuquerque, actually. And she actually she also had the Pueblo create their own water departments, and through the EPA they helped set their own Pueblo standard of water quality. And so anybody upriver would have to adhere to that water quality. And so they were actually the first Pueblo and the very first tribe in the US to set their own water quality standard. And it's and they were able to sue the city of Albuquerque. And it took about a decade of litigation, but they eventually were able to hold them accountable. And so this forced the city of Albuquerque to clean up their wastewater. And so if you scroll back up to that first photo that we kind of switched, here we go. So this is actually the water flow from the wastewater treatment plants that Isleta Pueblo helped force the city of Albuquerque to create. And so, yeah, I mean, she's just such an amazing person to be able to kind of spearhead this project that still has, very much strong repercussions or really strong impact that you can see today. Okay, let me see next. So this is El Vado Dam. This is north of Albuquerque, and it's the source of where all of the pueblos in the middle Rio Grande Valley region, it's where all their water is stored. So they don't exactly, not every pueblo has their water rights quantified, but they do, the Middle Rio Grande Agency, still has to allocate them water. And so this is where their water is stored and flows from. And so, yeah, you can see it there. This is the reservoir. Yeah, that's the reservoir where their water is kept. You can also see how low it is. Okay, next. Okay, Vernateller. Okay, so this is the last person that we featured in this story. This is Julia Bernal. She's the director and organizer for Pueblo Action Alliance. And they're very much in kind of an activist sort of grassroots organization that aims to advocate and raise awareness of Pueblo water rights. I think everybody has heard of the phrase or hashtag land back. But they really spearhead this campaign of water back. I think it's an because if you think about it, if tribes who are trying to get their, reaccumulate their homelands, well, they would also, to really kind of sort of help complete this, if you really want to have a strong and holistic view of tribal sovereignty and to be able to manage and also hold others accountable to your people and to your own tribal governments. You want to be able to help restore water rights to your tribe as well. So they're very much about getting the word out and helping connect tribes and other experts to one another. And so this is her just also meeting. We met under the bridge of Highway 550. It's kind of near Bernalillo County, or Bernalillo, and yeah. Let me see. So this is just another view of the river, and yeah, that's my talk.
Thank you, Kalen. It was great to hear more too, just about I really, as Alex said, having the portraits as part of the work, I think is really powerful, and what kind of, I was really interested as well when I came to your work when I was doing research for this show. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Martha, you're up next.
Thank you. And thank you, Alex and Kalen. And while they were dealing with the issues of the falling or diminishing amounts of water in our rivers, I grew up in San Francisco, and I grew up at the beach and live on the coast currently. So I have a lifelong love of the ocean. And I moved about 25 years ago south of San Francisco to a very small community right near Half Moon Bay. And I kept this project very hyper local. It's about sea level rise and climate change. And I kept it to a 30-mile radius from my home, because living at the beach, you can see how sea level rise is going to affect us in the future. And it's slowly affecting us right now. And what I really wanted to do, this project naturally is called Underwater, and is my personal and emotional response to climate change, but specifically sea level rise, and because of that, loss and disappearance. And what you'll see is images, but I wanted to represent our future reality in a very compelling, imaginative way that is not been seen before, and to make people see, feel, and think about our changing future. So I did a lot of experimentation with seawater. I took pigmented seawater, and I took the actual images themselves, and I dipped them and bathed them and swirled them in that pigmented seawater to express the future of sea level rise. So this image is very close to my home. It's only a half a mile away. And as you can see, this little condo building is built right on the edge with the riprap rocks. And statistically, I did a lot of research about sea level rise. And it's predicted by the end of the century that the oceans are expected to rise by 6 to 9 feet. So this particular structure is very precariously perched. So what you're seeing in it is currently high tide, not the highest of high tides, but even with 6 to 9 feet, it's going to be perilously in danger of being taken in by the ocean. And so that's represented by the pigmented seawater of the future of sea level rise. So the next image. So in the Half Moon Bay area, it's one of the few places that you can still go horseback riding on the beach. And and it's a very unique, popular thing to do in our area. And what I wanted to represent here is the emotional and psychological aspects of climate change and the feelings of loss of place. Because in the future, the access to this beach is going to be very limited. It's a very flat beach, and the water will just wash up and be right at the bottom of the bluffs. So horses on the beach and people walking on the beach is going to be very limited to certain times of day of, very low tides. The next image, please. So obviously there's a lot of erosion that happens with sea level rise. And it's very interesting that people may not realize, but as the planet warms, the size of the molecules of water actually grow greater. They expand. As well as, and the reason they do is because the ocean is the carbon sink of the world. It absorbs 75% of the carbon that is released into the atmosphere and is taken back into the ocean. And so molecules rise, but the water temperatures also increase. And that affects where we have ice stored throughout the Atlantic in both the North and South poles. This image represents that since the last ice age, the oceans have actually risen 410 feet, and there's still so much frozen water stored in the ice sheets and glaciers and in the north and south, but even on land areas. And the next image, please. So this is a very monumental structure in the Bay Area. It's the San Francisco Bay Bridge. And you can see it's supported by physical concrete structures that go into the water to the bottom of the bay and deeper to bedrock. But again, if all the glaciers were to melt, the ocean would rise by 274 feet. So even structures that carry that are transportation elements, that are infrastructure elements, that things that we depend upon every day would be substantially impacted. And the last image is that this is a train trestle. This is on the bay side of San Francisco Bay. And it, as you can see, that it sits very low on the water because the train trestle was built probably 100 years ago. And it is, in contrast to the Bay Bridge, it is in a much more immediate, precariously dangerous situation of being underwater and submerged. And so I just wanted to represent all of those, our future reality, in a way that people could visualize it, but respond to it and see it in sort of a sense of the watery environment that we can look to in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha. And if you are local, I do recommend coming to see these. Seeing these in particular in person is very different. I had seen these digitally and then met Martha at Photo Fest, and I was excited to see the work in person because the pigment and what she's adding to the images changes drastically when you see them in person. So thanks, Martha. Jennings, you're on mute.
Thank you. I just want to thank you so much for curating such a beautiful exhibition here and introducing me to the work of these artists, because I think all of your work has been so insightful. And Martha, I really enjoyed, since I'm talking about the East Coast and you're talking about the West Coast and we're talking about the rise of the water, it was really beautiful to see that. So my project is actually called Going Away From Here. And it's a collection of images, and it's also a limited edition fine artist book that shares the story of Tangier Island and its residents. I've been working on this project since 2017, and the intention of it is to really shed light upon the ongoing land loss and consequently what that actually means, like in the destruction of all things of a community and what makes communities unique. Tangier, a little bit about Tangier. It's located off the coast of Virginia in the Chesapeake Bay. Their economy is mostly crabbing, fishing, and oystering. And they're only accessible by boat or an airplane. They're really a 2-hour boat ride off the coast of Virginia. And they're known as the soft shell capital of the world. So if you've eaten soft shell crabs, blue crabs, the chances are they came from Tangier. The very water that the residents of Tangier depend upon to survive is swallowing them up 9 acres every year. So the scientists have documented that the rising sea levels of the Chesapeake Bay are among the highest recorded. The island is sinking and losing its land mass due to rising sea levels and coastal erosion. So like Martha, I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. That's where I spent my formative years. I was always out on the boat fishing with my father. And I was always really intrigued by the fishermen of Tangier. They spoke a Baroque kind of dialect. They had been isolated, and they were really unique. And there was always these like stories about the Tangier men. But in 2017, I watched as their story and the island and their situation was gaining this national attention from Donald Trump and Al Gore. And they were using and having the mayor come out and using them as a conversation. And I'm going to kind of swing back to that in a little bit, but a few things about Tangier. More than 2/3 of the island's mass is already gone. Most of the individual properties are now wetland areas. Researchers state that the entire island will be gone by 2051 if nothing is done. They are predicted to be America's first climate change refugees. So they're going to be forced to evacuate because of the erosion and the rising sea levels. It is 3 feet above sea level, and there's an image that I sent upon approach. It's like, keep going. One more. It's like where you can just see the island where you're approaching it. And it's just shows that it's 3 feet above sea level, and you'll see it. It's home to 450 residents. There it is. So you can see just the next storm. They are home to 450 residents, which is about half of what they were in 1940. And you can see that it's really hard to see them off in the distance. The only thing you see is their water tower that has a crab on one side and a cross on the other. So they're extremely religious. And it's already been split. If you could go to the aerial, sorry. The water's already been split through the island all the way, as you can see it, just all around it. And the water seeps up through the ground below. Because of this, the residents actually, you can see that they live on this one area of high land and on the right side central area. And then that cuts right through the middle is actually where their crab houses are. So they have to take a boat to even get from their house to their crab houses to take care of the crabs that they've caught. So they use these skiffs to navigate the shallow waters. This saltwater intrusion has rendered much of the land already non-productive, so there's no longer livestock or crops on the island. owing to the erosion, the plants, trees, and protective grasses for wildlife and birds are washing away. And it's affecting the crabbing industry, right? Because if the salt water is killing the grasses and the grasses aren't there, they're not there for the crabs. So it's really this wonderful island that's amazing, and the people are amazing. But I would say they say that they feel like they're being studied, and they are a great study because there's so much happening and there's so many layers that I think that climate change is causing. And it's not just one thing. It's not one thing that we can go for. It's all these things that are happening. And Martha was really talking about some of that. The other thing that's happening is that the younger generation they're graduating and they're not necessarily coming back to the island anymore. So when you're on the island, you can just keep flipping through them, Samantha. But when you're on the island, there is a school, and there's an image here of the school, and it houses K through 12. But they're not coming back, right, once they graduate, because the industry isn't there anymore. So when you get there, they're like 18 years of age, and then maybe like 40 years of age. There's a huge gap there. And I think that that's a conversation. The watermen have to tie up their boats to poles in order to prevent their boats from floating away at high tide. Their cemeteries are overcrowded due to lack of space to bury their dead. So their tombstones are now being placed, and the bodies are now being placed in the front lawns of homes more inland. This isn't like a family plot. This doesn't belong to these people. It's just where they're putting the cemeteries. When speaking to the residents, it's really interesting, and you can hold right there. When speaking to the residents, it's really interesting because when they talk, they refer to time by way of storms. So they'll say, well, I can't remember. I think that was before Isabel, or, after Floyd, because it has such an impact on their way of living. This actually, can you go to, there's one up at the school with the water leading up to it. One more. Well, this is high tide in the town, and you can see this is what happens at high tide. If you go back, that's where the water is like seeping up from below. That's downtown.
Is the school
you went by? It's black and white. I'm sorry. Maybe we should have done them in order. It's actually got water leading up to it. And
it's this one.
That's
right?
it. Yeah, that's it. Sorry.
That's okay.
So the school actually houses grades K through 12, and they had 47 students enrolled in 2020, and in 2021 they had 6 seniors. So this is, again, high tide where it cuts through. There's an area of the island that's called the Upwards, and that's the upward part of the island. And this is where their grandparents lived. And you can just start floating through them. The residents told me about the Upwards because it was the area that was succumbed to the sea in the 1930s. It's where their grandparents lived. And it was really like, it's a 10-minute boat ride, but it's really heart-wrenching when you get there. So when you pull up, you have to take a skiff, first of all, because where the water has overtaken the island, it's about 1 to 2 feet in depth. And so you have to take these small, shallow hull boats. When you get there, there are when you walk the coast of the upper area, there's just personal items that are already left behind, like broken glass and household objects. There was a cemetery there that's floating away. So there was like bones and human bones. And all the headstones are just kind of in the sand at that point. So it's right there in front of them and in front of you in the upper part is their future. And they can see what their future is. They understand what it is. They know that. They're fully aware of what is coming. But the conversation that they have is that they're waiting to see, because they have done certain things to build jetties on parts of the island that are helping. But it gets really tangled in that area. So this project, when I started working on it, I knew that I wanted it to exist as a fine artist book and an exhibition. So the work actually exists as black and white prints and color prints. And with the prints are accompanying QR codes that if you scan them, it plays recordings of me talking to the islanders about these images and them talking about their situation. I really thought the QR codes were a big, important part of this because it gave the voice back to the islanders so that they could then speak for themselves out with the imagery. And then could you go to the images of the book? So at the very beginning of this book, I knew that I wanted this to be a fine artist, limited edition fine artist book. I felt that the artist book itself, and you can flip to the next one. I felt that the book itself, it was really important because it would function in like a myriad of ways. It would, one, tell a story of the island of Tangier and inform the viewer about Tangier's residents and what they're facing today. Two, it would serve as an archive of what no longer exists and functions as a landscape through documentation. And three, the accompanying text and quotes, as I stated earlier, gives a voice to the islanders and it bears witness to their unique culture and dialect. Can you next one? So within the book and in the exhibition, it was really important to me to show two different perspectives of the island. I have black and white images, and they sort of show the nostalgia of what once was or what will once be. And then in the next slide are the color images. And this is the grittier side of what's actually happening. This is high tide. This is where it's going on right now as it exists today. So for the exhibition, they're facing each other and they sort of respond to each other. And I thought that that was a really important conversation. And in the book, can you go to the next slide? I don't know if I have another one of the book. Wait, go back up to the whole book. Sorry. It's a do-say-do format. And so it was really important that you could see both perspectives as it exists in the same. The other thing that was really important to me was that the book tell their story just in holding it and viewing it. So you can see the clamshell. If you show the detail of the clamshell, the clamshell itself, up, I think it went up, yeah, there. The clamshell itself contains laser cut sea glass, and it's based on topographical map and illustrations that show the island as it was in 1850, which is the outside darker area, and then where it is today, and then it shows where it will be when it's no longer inhabitable. So it's actually a building of sea glass stacked on top of each other, so you can see it. And then the covers themselves, if you can go to the next one, contain the nautical charts of Tangier, and I have them letterpressed into the covers, and the charts show the depths around the island. So you can see this little outline around the island that shows that it's 1 to 2 feet there. And that's part of the reason these boats will come in and try to bring the riprap, but they can't get the boats with the riprap to the coast, right? Because the water's so shallow. So there's just a lot of stuff, but not to mention that graphically, I thought that the nautical charts were quite beautiful. So really, could you go through the slide? Sorry. My intention with this project, as I stated, was to shed light on the land loss and the impending climate refugees, but that there's more at stake when losing a place. It also means the destruction of the community and what makes that community unique. So the people of Tangier and their situation have received attention from several media outlets, including National Geographic and the New Yorker and NPR. But I feel that the conversations and implications still need to be had. They not only sadly tell the tale of many low-lying cities in the US, but around the world. And according to NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, Miami, Florida, Atlantic City, New Jersey, New Orleans, Louisiana, Galveston, Texas, Charleston, South Carolina, and Virginia Beach, Virginia, are all predicted to be underwater at 2100. So by photographing Tangier, I really wanted to kind of show the viewer about the need to take notice now and to really think about the difficult decisions that stand before us, because we need to really be thinking about who are we willing to save and who are we willing to let wash away, because we're really going to have to start making some real decisions about this. And I think it's important to talk about the communities and what that means and what is really at stake. So this is going away from here. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's just another install shot that shows kind of both walls that Jennings' work is on. And I wanted to, now that we've kind of all talked, I didn't talk about this at the start, but curatorially for me, I really like to put work in conversation at CPAC, and I'd been thinking a lot about water and climate. And so, different intersections of seeing different part of these projects over the last few years, and doing other research about artists. Obviously, there's lots of artists that are making work about the climate and water specifically. But I really liked the conversation that was created, both what was happening in the middle of the country with the Colorado and the Rio Grande, Kalen and Alex are talking about, and then also this kind of then looking coastally, what's happening on the East and West Coast with sea level rise. So just to give a little background of kind of why I chose to put all this work together. And I just we had one question, couple questions in the Q&A, but I just wanted to kind of touch on, I was thinking about questions for after the panel, and I was reading on the EPA's website, which states that climate scientists overwhelmingly agree that people are contributing significantly to today's climate change, primarily by releasing excess greenhouse gases into the atmosphere from activities such as burning fossil fuels for energy, cultivating crops, raising livestock, and clearing forests. So things that many of us and many of you who are making these pictures know about. So I wanted to, before we get to the questions, touch a little bit, if you could each, about how you feel photography as a medium helps to raise awareness of climate change and the issues that each of you are kind of addressing in your work. I know, Jennings, you kind of touched a little bit more on that at the end with yours, but if anyone else can kind of chime in with some commentary around that.
Well, I have a comment in regards to that, and thank you. Because, sea level rise in particular, as well as falling waterways, is something to some degree happens very slowly over time. And therefore, it's not that self-evident right away. And people hear these predictions, and what you see is diagrams about how the atmosphere and its relationship to this and that, but it doesn't touch home. It doesn't touch us in a personal way. And I think that photographs illustrate the touching of it in a personal, emotional way that then people can really relate to. Wow, this is what we're doing. And it's more impactful than the scientific diagrams that you see, because you're seeing the reality of it and the future reality. I mean, with the Tangier project, you're seeing it now, whereas I'm showing something even more further down the line. And so, therefore, I think all of these projects illustrate it in varying degrees over time of what's happening. And I think photography allows us to do that in a very unique medium that one can really relate to, because photographs are real, and it makes it impactful.
Great, thank you. Alex or Kalen?
I mean, I think continuing from where Martha was saying, I think there's kind of three levels in my mind of understanding certain kinds of things. One is to read about it, and words are really important because they can express some things that images can't in terms of abstraction and thinking and things like that. And then the next is to see imagery of things, and then the next is to see things or feel things or experience things in person. And I'm very conscious of my own work of some of these places I'm going to because I really need to see them and share them with others. But sometimes I also just want to be there and feel them myself. for my own deeper understanding. And I think I'm kind of hoping that my pictures help bridge that for somebody who can't get to some of these places. People, I think it's easy to read about what's happening in the case of my work, with river levels or water in the West. And if you live in the East Coast, it may seem kind of far away, and you need to have you have to have it in your face a little more to understand how real it is. And I think it takes all different levels. I think it takes seeing something, of the group in the room right now. I think Kalen's and my work are, well, I don't want to say it that way. There's different levels of direct documentation versus sort of more poetic gestures, and they're all important. They're all really important, is the point I'm trying to make. And I think, we need to be shown the evidence, and then we need to be moved to care, and then moved to actually do something about it. And maybe also moved to get other people to do something about it, because individually, there's only so much we can do, but collectively it's a different story. So I think I see this work as tiny cogs in a much bigger machine of trying to get the greater populace aware and moving. I'm always a little unsure how directly my images do it, but I also feel like, just kind of like attending a protest march or something, my own thing by myself may not do it, but if you're doing it and you're doing it and you're doing it, I'm looking at all of you, and we're all doing it, then, people start to sit up and take note, right?
Absolutely. And I wanted to, Kalen, unless you had something you wanted to add, there were a couple questions specifically for Martha and Jennings. The first one, Martha, was for you about have you looked or found any historical photos of the railroad image? The one you kind of spoke about last of the trestle bridge. Someone was curious about how it has changed since it was originally built. And she's also thanking all photographers for a topic close to her heart.
I think that's a wonderful idea to look at historical photographs to see the relationship of what was specifically some time ago. And I think that would be a beautiful way to introduce some diptychs. I do have some future plans of showing where I have found, for instance, the Cliff House in San Francisco was perched on rocks right at the edge, the very tip of Ocean Beach, fronting it. And there are historical photographs of that. And then I was going to go photograph it at similar tidal levels, or low or high tide, and try to capture what is now, and see what that relationship is. I'm not sure that I could find historical photographs of all, but it would be nice to include that as part of maybe a beginning or end part of the project in a way.
Great, thank you. And the other question, Jennings, was for you. Do you have tipped in prints in the portfolio box that has the glass map? They noticed a gloved hand in one of the slides.
They're tipped in. It was really important that it was hand pulled. They're on like a Hahnemühle paper, and they're tipped in, and then there's 2 freestanding prints in there as well.
Great. And then I just wanted to show one other install shot. And I just wanted to also kind of, we've kind of talked a little bit just to kind of in closing, unless there are any other questions. I think that kind of Jennings, what you talked about, and then also Kalen in your work with the portraits, how the communities are affected. And obviously that's being discussed in Martha and also Alex in yours. But just what that's doing, I think in Alex, in your images where you see like the housing developments and, this to kind of put image to what we hear these stories about, to what you were kind of talking about before, how do we how do we show these images to demonstrate more of what's happening to the communities, what's happening, I think water rights, specifically for Indigenous communities, is so important and something that is not talked enough about. I mean, I feel like lately I've been hearing more stories in the news, but again, not enough. So do you feel that the work that you're making, again, kind of touching back on that last question, is bringing about solutions or starting to bring about solutions in the areas where you're photographing?
Let me see. That's a hard question. I think I would love to know that my work had really some strong impact. I think that what I sort of think of when I produce work and is, I think what some of the other panelists, I think Alex may have touched on as well, is that these are all sort of works that are in conversation with one another. And, they go along with other people's reporting or other artists' photographs that are all trying to show the effects of something so broad and can feel so abstract and so unimaginably difficult to process, like climate change, and being able to show these kinds of really hyper localized places and landscapes, I think really helps, hopefully it impacts readers or viewers or, exhibit viewers to see their own communities or landscapes or people reflected in these kinds of stories. I was what really excited me about producing some of these portraits and places around my own state is that I got to hear just from the people who are leading or have led past water rights fights. And so I think that these are the people who are really kind of helping to carry those challenges into the future. And so I think anything that I can do to help, get their stories and message across, I think has been really valuable for me, honestly.
Great, thank you.
If I could just jump in, I think it's great that your work's been in High Country News, because I think they're really doing their best to be kind of a leading flag for Indigenous water rights and Indigenous issues in general. And so, I think you're probably part of a machine. I don't want to use the word machine. You're part of an organization and a community that's doing really good work in general. And I think there's an additive quality to that. If someone sees your work and then sees other projects highlighted there, in the months before or after that, you start to, I think it builds momentum. And, they're doing that on many issues, but in that in particular, I've been really impressed with the work they've been doing the last few years. So.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what, you were talking about with the sciences. And I think that we all have a role in it. It's such a big task at hand to talk about and figure out. And I think that we all have a role. And so, I've been working with some of the environmental scientists at my university and having a lot of discussions with them. And it's really interesting how when I present this work or research, they're not looking at the story or the humanities side, like they're truly in the sciences, but we need that. And we need, like Alex was saying, this poetic side of it, the story and the narrative. And I think all of it together gives this better picture of what's happening. And I think it's, when I was speaking to one of the Corps engineers about bringing this riprap, he was telling me, well, we got it here, we couldn't get it there. And I was like, well, have you ever been on the island? And he's like, no, because he's talking from an office in Norfolk, Virginia, and this is in Tangier. And so I think it's different projects like ours that are bringing attention to maybe that part of it. And together we can all make something big happen, just my thought.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, if no one else has any other questions, I know there weren't any other questions in the chat. I want to thank you all for sharing about your work and your projects more in depth. It's really fantastic to have the exhibition up. And I'm so honored to chat with all of you more this evening. So thank you for your time and for sharing about all your important work. And I look forward to welcoming people into the space to see the work while it's still up until November 18th. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And
Thanks, Samantha.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one. Nice meeting everyone.
Nice to meet you all. Take care.
Bye.